Blast light is the world's smallest and most convenient UVC disinfection light to help keep you safe against COVID-19. I take mine everywhere I go. Go to davidpakman.com/blastlight to get it for 40% off. The link is down below. Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. So Republicans have blocked even debating and discussing this major voting rights bill that we've been talking about now for quite some time. And we are really now getting into sort of the most disgusting and destructive of American politics. And of course, huge blame goes directly to the Republicans who voted against even debating the voting rights bill. But also, we can't ignore the fact that the great negotiation that Joe Biden has claimed he would be able to do has not even led to a debate about the voting rights bill. And we're going to have video from the floor of the Senate and much more. And in fact, maybe we'll even start there. This is the moment where Kamala Harris, who presided over the Senate during this vote, announced that the bill we were not moving forward into debate. Take a look at this.
The yeas are 50, the nays are 50. 3/5 of the senators duly chosen and sworn not having voted in the affirmative. The motion is not agreed to.
Now, what you have to understand when you evaluate this is that there really are two completely different realities on this issue. Mitch McConnell, for example, came out and said, we don't even really have a voting rights issue in this country. There aren't even people trying to suppress the ability of individuals to vote. He said this, I guess, with what for Mitch McConnell counts as a straight face. Let's take a look at what Mitch McConnell had to say. I mean, how do you say this with a straight face? How do you have the gumption and the tolerance for cringe to come out and say the following?
And many of you have written about the subject of big lies. Well, the biggest lie being told in American politics in recent weeks has been that the states are involved in a systematic effort to suppress the vote.
That's just why would anyone think that that's going on? I mean, other than the fact that Republicans have been openly admitting it since at least 2012, when Mike Turzai said voter ID is going to make it so that Mitt Romney wins Pennsylvania. And then everything else that happened in the 9 years that followed, and the 250 something bills across the country.
Those arguments are being made by people who obviously haven't read any of these new state laws, because that's not happening. As we all know, we had the biggest turnout last year since 1900.
Now, that's a red herring. That's a complete and total biggest turnout since 1900. How many people lived in the United States in 1900? So there's 3 or 4 different reasons why that's not a good argument. Number one, as the population continues to get larger and larger, you would expect more and more people to vote. Trump often points to, hey, I got 75 million votes. He really got 74. That makes it hard to believe that I lost, given that 74 million people voted for me. Well, even more people voted for Joe Biden. And in addition to that, we don't know how many people wanted to vote. So it's just a complete and total red herring. Let's just look at a little bit more of this.
There is no effort in any state in America to suppress votes based upon suppression of minority participation.
So that's a complete and total lie. I mean, it couldn't be a more dishonest thing to say. So let's look at a little bit of the reporting about this. CNN reporting Senate Republicans block signature Democratic election bill in key test vote, saying that Senate Democrats suffered a loss when Republican opposition sunk their signature voting and election bill during a key test vote, underscoring the limits of the party's power with the narrowest possible Senate majority. A procedural vote to open debate was defeated by 50-50, falling short of the 60 votes needed. Democrats were united in favor after securing Joe Manchin's support, but Republicans were united against it, causing the measure to fail to advance. Democratic senators have pitched the legislation as a necessary counter to state-level efforts to restrict voting access. Republicans have decried it as a partisan power grab and a federal overreach into state voting and election systems. The article goes on to say Senate Democrats are already beginning to map out their next steps to draw attention to the issue and put the focus on a critical battleground state, Georgia. Now, one of the lies that they are already telling about Georgia is, hey, listen, voter purges are normal. This is one of the techniques or tactics that is being used by Republicans to hurt Democrats in elections. And it is to purge voter rolls, but to say every state does it. Now, it's true that every state does it, but with far less restrictive barometers than what Georgia is putting in place. And so you really have to look at the details. And this is one of those issues where if you're not following it relatively closely, you're not going to understand why the bullet points from Republicans fall short. And this everybody does it one is really an important example, an illuminating example, which is they insist every state has a system for deciding who should no longer be considered an active registered voter. And it depends on how recently you have voted and other factors. What's being done in Georgia is far more aggressive, and it's being done in a very tailored way that, while in an overt way, it doesn't target minority voters, it's focused on those more likely to be voting for Democrats who happen to disproportionately be non-white voters. So I get it. People are busy. People are working. People have lives. So unless you're following it closely, you would not necessarily understand why the claims that are being made are so deceptive. Now, I want to talk about one other thing here, which is the filibuster aspect of this. There is a good article in the LA Times, an editorial by the Times editorial board, which says Senate Republicans won't even consider voting rights. The filibuster must go. And it makes sense that there is increased pressure to do away with or modify the filibuster, because it's not even that they're voting against the bill. They're voting against debating the bill. And you need 60 votes in order to move forward. They wrote yesterday, as expected, debate on a bill to protect voting rights was blocked in the Senate when Democratic sponsors failed to garner 60 votes. But in reaching out to centrist Joe Manchin, Democrats indicated they were open to compromise. The shameful reaction of Senate Republicans, on the other hand, demonstrated that they are willing to ignore laws approved by Republican-controlled legislatures that make voting harder. Those measures reflect the lingering malign influence of Donald Trump's big lie that the 2020 election was stolen. They go on to say about the filibuster, and I want to find the exact point where that is. After Tuesday's vote, Schumer said that it represented the starting gun, not the finish line. Manchin and another Democratic Senator, Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, have resisted the idea of abolishing the filibuster. But if Republican senators continue to stonewall reasonable legislation to protect the right to vote, those two reluctant Democrats must be pressed to recognize that, at least where protecting democracy is concerned, the filibuster must go. And this is absolutely and totally correct. Now, whether the filibuster must go in total, which potentially is going to have repercussions against Democrats when Republicans invariably take control again, at least in practical terms, you either need to reform it to require a talking filibuster. You either need to require the 40 no votes to be in the Senate at all times in order to continue. Something absolutely has to be done. I think at this point, it's been clear, if Republicans and Democrats were equal in their willingness to do whatever needs to be done to move a bill forward, then maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation. But Democrats have shown that they are not willing to do what needs to be done in the way that Republicans are to get moving forward on legislation that they claim is important to them. So something is going to have to be done to the filibuster. It absolutely is time. And again, if Republicans said, we believe we have a really strong case why this bill should not pass and we plan not to support it, but let's debate the bill and then make their case against the bill during debate, I would have a different perspective. But they're saying no to even debating the bill. Something has to be done, and the filibuster is going to have to be a big piece of that. Let's talk about the New York City mayoral primary. Yesterday, we had the Democratic mayoral primary in New York City and the Republican mayoral primary in New York City. There were high hopes among some that former Democratic presidential candidate Andrew Yang would do well in the Democratic primary New York City mayoral race. He came out to a fast start, polling really, really well in early polls, although that started to fade. Part of the belief that the fade of Andrew Yang was because of early name recognition. He jumped ahead because of early name recognition from the Democratic primary. Also questions about, I guess we would call it the authenticity of Andrew Yang as a New Yorker. And there were all sorts of kind of xenophobic overtones to that. There is no question that there was an aspect of the opposition to accepting Andrew Yang as a real New Yorker came from some anti-Asian xenophobia. And also there was the sense that Andrew Yang, having lived out of the city for a long time, was not a real New Yorker in that sense as well, disaggregating some xenophobia from the accurate understanding of Andrew Yang's residence, a complicated and difficult thing, and important not to invalidate any aspect of that because all of it were important aspects. All of those aspects were relevant, but ultimately it did not go well for Andrew Yang. The results as we have them right now have Eric Adams leading. It is a ranked choice election. And right now you have Eric Adams leading at just shy of 32% on the Democratic side, with Maya Wiley close to 10 points behind at 22%. Catherine Garcia closely behind Maya Wiley in third place at 19.5%. And then pretty significantly further down with only about a third of the support of the leading candidate, Eric Adams, Andrew Yang at 11.7%. Scott Stringer and Dianne Morales combining for just shy of 8%. Over on the Republican side, Curtis Sliwa, quite a well-known face and figure in New York City now for decades, of course, of Guardian Angels fame. Curtis Sliwa easily winning the Republican primary with about 72% of the vote over Fernando Mateo. Here is a video of Andrew Yang, who is all about math and the numbers, rightly coming out last night and saying, I don't have the numbers. I simply don't have the numbers. Take a listen to this.
Campaign. But you all know I am a numbers guy.
Right.
I'm someone who traffics in what's happening by the numbers. And I am not going to be the next mayor of New York City based upon the numbers that have come in tonight.
Right.
I am conceding this race, though we're not sure ultimately who the next mayor is going to be, but whoever that person is, I will be very happy to work with them. Campaign.
Now, a bunch of people coming out and saying, you know, what pomposity from Andrew Yang. Why would the eventual mayor work on anything with the fourth place finisher in the Democratic primary? I didn't see it that way. I saw it simply as an act of good faith. I don't think that is a big deal. I think the more interesting story, however, is how New York City is an interesting place in that the voters really did not seem to care about the name recognition of Andrew Yang. It helped him early, but it did not carry him to the finish line. And now we are going to see the general election get going. New York City, interesting as it's not necessarily a barometer nationally, but there are a lot of things in New York City that relate to issues that many cities across the country are dealing with. There are questions now about how to deal with what are widely perceived to be short-term, but certainly upticks in certain types of crime. And later today, Joe Biden is going to have a big event related to gun violence. There are also questions about, you know, there's been a sort of bifurcation at the local and semi-local level about how politics should be focused in the United States. There are all these national issues and cultural issues that are getting a lot of attention when you watch Fox News and CNN and MSNBC. And there have been attempts to insert those as the important issues into local races. In some places, to a degree, it's worked, where local races become about will the city council boycott Israel? Or will we make a statement about critical race theory as examples? But what I am seeing in New York City is that voters really seem to care much more about local economic issues, local issues of public transit and rent prices, and really that nitty gritty, which takes me back to the James Carville 1990s perspective of It's the Economy, Stupid. It's not seeming to me like making local races about national, cultural, or even irrelevant to the local race foreign policy issues. That seems to be coming through in the results that we're seeing in New York City. So we're going to follow the race, even though it's a local race, because it has a lot of national implications. Let me know your thoughts about what happened to Andrew Yang in New York City. I laid out what I think held him back. Let me know what you think. You can find me on Twitter at @Pakman. We're going to take a quick break, and we've got really just a packed program for you today. One of our sponsors is Blast Light, the smallest and most convenient UV disinfection light on the market. COVID is not over. There are new variants. There might be future resurgences. So, of course, it's still important to take precautions, keep yourself safe, keep people around you safe. UVC lights have been proven to safely and rapidly kill bacteria, mold, fungi, and viruses, including COVID-19. Blast Light is a convenient keychain UVC light that you can take wherever you go. I keep it attached to my keys. It goes everywhere with me. It's easy to use. It disinfects any surface in just seconds with a really long battery life, and it's rechargeable. I've looked at a bunch of different UVC light options, and this is by far the most compact and portable one out there. Blast Light is normally $99, but my audience can get it for 40% off, which comes to $59.50 when you go to davidpakman.com/blastlight. The link is underneath this video. Remember that the David Pakman Show is an independent media program, does depend on your support. I would love it if you grabbed a membership on my website, joinpakman.com. You know, we've had a number of examples over the last couple of weeks to couple of months of different things being equated to being like the Holocaust or like World War II or like historical attacks on Jews. And incorrectly so. And now the sort of natural and predictable next step in this is taking place, which is that we're starting to see segments on right-wing media saying that teaching critical race theory, or certainly critical race theory being part of the national understanding of how things work, is like the Holocaust. We're going to have a clip of this with right-wing radio host Michael Savage. Now, I know that some people get angry when I do the disclaimers. I feel that it's necessary here. I am a critic of critical race theory. I've critiqued critical race theory along the lines that I've critiqued other theories that come out of the postmodernist and post-structuralist ideology. I've critiqued critical race theory as reductive. But critical race theory is not like the Holocaust. That's a wild and crazy thing to say. The Daily Beast summarizes, Newsmax goes there. Critical race theory is the road to death camps for white people. Right-wing radio talker Michael Savage declared the obscure academic theory akin to the Holocaust, prompting a supportive response from a Newsmax TV host. Far-right radio host Michael Savage took conservatives' latest moral panic to a bonkers new level during a Monday night Newsmax appearance, warning that the teaching of so-called critical race theory in schools is akin to exactly what was done to the Jews in Germany. Now, that is not true. We're going to look at the video clip. Michael Savage is a guy we've covered on the program for a long time. He is desperate to maintain some level of relevance and comparing things to the Holocaust, especially when you yourself are Jewish. And remember that that's something that the right is playing up. Michael Savage is Jewish. That makes it get more attention. It doesn't make it any more accurate. Let's take a listen to this. And by the way, the people who decry the identity politics say, I don't know, should we listen to Savage because he is Jewish after all? Maybe he can tell us what things are like the Holocaust. Here we go.
My blood's boiling listening to Chuck Todd. I wanted to reach through the screen and smack him in the face.
This is, by the way, if you're not familiar with Michael Savage, this is how he normally talks. And it's just a way that it's part of his shtick, essentially, to talk in this. He's just constantly outraged at everything, everybody.
Does he have children? Can you imagine having a little child who goes to school and is told that he's no good, his race is no good, he's evil, his parents are evil, his nation is evil? These are the same SOBs who lectured us for 20 years about don't be a bully, tolerate everything. And now they're beating up white children in schoolrooms. And I'm not going to mince words. You can cut me off if you have to. I know you probably agree with me. I can't take this anymore. And there's only one solution to it. Sue the goddamn schools if they do it to your child for child abuse.
Now, when he says if they do it to your child for child abuse, I have said before, I do think that as a starting point, teaching children that they are in some way part of a bad group because of the color of their skin, I'm against that, and that's bad. For the most part, critical race theory is taught to college students and only in certain relevant classes that college students have chosen to take. What Michael Savage is referring to, which exists very anecdotally, and I would be against it, but it is not really the issue, is certain exercises that have been done in elementary or junior high schools, which start to sort of frame the question of race and goodness and badness in a way that I don't think is useful or productive in any way to bettering race relations. But remember that this is part of the ruse. The vast majority of what would fall under the guise of critical race theory is being taught to college students, and it is being taught as theory. It is not being taught as you were bad for this reason or that reason that relates to your skin color. So the whole framing here is wrong. But let's get to the really crazy part.
You will win, because that's the only way to stop this. These children are being humiliated and hurt and damaged for life by a psychotic woman who came up with this lie called critical race theory, which is nothing but racism towards white people. No other race is targeted. I could go on, and I could go on and on. I've studied history. I know where this starts. I know where it ends. It started in the same kind of thing started in Germany. The Jews were no good. The Jews did this. The Jews did that. The next thing you knew, they were being excluded from swimming pools. They didn't put them in concentration camps overnight. I studied this intimately.
Now, what's really interesting about that, the analogy to the Holocaust is completely wrong. But Michael Savage says something really interesting there, which is he says it didn't happen overnight. That phrase very accurately describes the creeping authoritarianism and nuttery that we saw under Donald Trump. If on the day after Trump was elected in 2016, I had told you, by the end of this, Trump will be trying to steal an election he clearly lost, trying to use the Department of Justice and all of these different aspects of government to do his bidding, demanding that the Supreme Court do X, Y, and Z, all of the different mishandling a pandemic during which he will suggest that infected Americans be sent to Guantanamo Bay. Nobody would have believed it if I had said that on, November 8th of 2016 or whatever the date was. But it slowly creeps in to the point where by the time those things were happening, the response was nowhere near what it should have been. It doesn't apply here to critical race theory, but it would have applied if Michael Savage had talked about this in relation to Trump's creeping authoritarianism. Just a few more seconds here.
I'm Jewish. I know how this starts. Attacks.
That's identity politics, by the way. That's the identity politics they decry. Because he's Jewish, he must be right about what things are like the Holocaust.
On white people is exactly what was done to the Jews in Germany in the 30s. Don't fall for this garbage. This is the road to the death camps. Stand up to these bastards and sue them.
Yeah. So there is Michael Savage, and it is yet another analogy to the Holocaust that makes absolutely no sense. And the sad thing about this is there are real serious critiques of critical race theory as an academic theory. When you go to, this is like Jews being excluded from swimming pools and the precursors to concentration camps, you just lose it. And I would actually respect one of these right wingers in their opposition to critical race theory much more if they just levied a sober and sensible critique. That's not what we're seeing from people like Michael Savage. Really interesting leaked documents showed that, at least in some context, the U.S. government is considering socialists terrorists alongside sort of neo-Nazis. This is a very, very interesting report that I want to look at with you today from The Intercept, written by Ken Klippenstein. U.S. military training document says socialists represent terrorist ideology. A Navy training document asks, anarchists, socialists, and neo-Nazis represent which terrorist ideological category? We're going to look at the document in a moment. The article explains a Navy counterterrorism training document obtained exclusively by The Intercept appears to conflate socialists with terrorists and lists the left-wing ideology alongside neo-Nazis. A section of the training document subtitled Study Questions includes the following. Anarchists, socialists, and neo-Nazis represent which terrorist ideological category? The correct answer is political terrorists, a military source briefed on the training told me. Let's take a look at the document briefly. This is a trainee guide. It has an introduction which explains that the assignment sheet is designed to assist the student in attaining knowledge necessary to perform the duties as an assigned anti-terrorism officer. And one of the study questions is indeed the third question. Anarchists, socialists, and neo-Nazis represent which terrorist ideological category? And as Ken Klippenstein says in the article, political terrorists is the answer that is there. It's just ineffective training because whoever is directing the Navy anti-terror curriculum would rather vilify the left than actually protect anything, said the military official who spoke to Ken, who is not authorized to speak publicly, despite the fact that the most prominent threat is domestic right-wing terror. The article also notes both the FBI and Department of Homeland Security have identified white supremacists as the deadliest terror threat to the U.S. We've covered that extensively before. In October 2020, DHS issued its first annual Homeland Threat Assessment Report, stating that white supremacists were exceptionally lethal and will remain the most persistent and lethal threat in the homeland. In September, FBI Director Christopher Wray said the white supremacists have been responsible for the most lethal attacks over the last decade and that they comprise the biggest chunk of our domestic terrorism portfolio. So there's definitely more here that we don't know, but I can't think of any reason that you would have neo-Nazis and socialists in the same category. Now, somebody, if I were to steel man this and come up with the best possible explanation for why they would be in the same category. And again, I don't think this is a good steel manning of it, but one could say, while you can have a neo-Nazi ideology and not go and commit terrorist acts, and you can also have a socialistic ideology and not go and commit terrorist acts, both are ideologies which, if taken to a perverted endpoint, could lead people to commit real world acts of violence. But I think it's essentially BS. Socialism, I am not a socialist. I don't believe that socializing the means of production and that saying that if one starts a business and buys all of the equipment and rents the office space and takes the legal risk and on and on and on, that as they hire employees, they should be forced to divvy up ownership of that business to everybody. Like, I just don't agree with that. I think it's okay for markets to direct resources in most cases, although there are some areas like education and healthcare, and in some senses, maybe housing, where we should take them at least partially out of the market. Or completely in some cases. Like I'm right there, with that, but I am not a socialist. I just don't see how that leads to so-called terrorism in the way that neo-Nazi ideology does. Now, I understand there's many neo-Nazis who just sort of like sit at home and they, maybe tweet stuff or post stuff, but they don't actually commit any real world acts of terror. I understand that. But I really, even in trying to defend this, as strongly as I could imagine one could, the inclusion of socialist beliefs and neo-Nazi beliefs under the same category, it doesn't make any sense to me. And so I'd be curious to hear from people in the audience. Can you come up with some way to defend this? And I'm seeing one other defense, which is kind of integrating socialist beliefs with Antifa and saying, well, Antifa does real world violence. Okay, but I think it's still a stretch, because while I think it's relatively uncontroversial to say that Antifa is not just based in anti-fascist beliefs, but heavily inspired to some degree by Marxism, including socialism on the list of terrorism seems like 5 or 6 steps forward from that. Like I did the best I could to say, what is a way that we could defend this? I can't think of one. So I want to hear from you, and we'll have more on this on the David Pakman Show Instagram, which you can find at David Pakman Show. It's not making sense to me, guys. It seems completely wacky to include neo-Nazism and socialism under the same umbrella. Let me know your thoughts. I'll follow up if I have some interesting responses. What if you could read 10 books in just one sitting? That's exactly what one of my favorite apps lets you do. It's called Blinkist, and what they do is take thousands of popular nonfiction books. They condense them down into text or audio that you can consume in 15 minutes. Blinkist makes sure that you're getting all of the important core insights from each book. So it's perfect for exploring a book you otherwise wouldn't have time for. If there's a full book you're thinking about buying, you can use Blinkist to get a sample first. Just think how much you can enrich yourself by being able to soak up an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month, and you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video. So this week we've been learning just little piecemeal about what was taking place behind the scenes in the prior administration at the start of the pandemic. One completely off the wall bullet point that we got was that Donald Trump was looking at sending Americans who were infected with the virus to the Guantanamo Bay detention center in Cuba. I mean, just completely out of this world, bonkers insanity. There is now a new report in Slate that summarizes more of what we are increasingly learning, and it is really wacky stuff. The Slate article says the evidence of Trump's pandemic sabotage keeps piling up. A new book shows how he concealed the crisis to protect his image, and it is unbelievable. The article talks about this book by Yasmin Abudaleb and Damian Paletta from the Washington Post. And it points out that they present their findings in the new book, Nightmare Scenario, inside the Trump administration's response to the pandemic that changed history. The book relies in part on interviews with former Trump officials, won't be available until June 29th, but there are excerpts quoted in the Post that describe several incriminating episodes. In at least 2 cases, Trump tried to keep infected Americans from setting foot in the United States, not to prevent the virus from spreading, but to prevent the infections from being counted as part of Trump's record. In one instance, Trump's opposition to letting 14 Americans return from a cruise ship, the Diamond Princess, the authors add backstage details. Trump complained to Alex Azar, his Secretary of Health and Human Services, that the return of the infected Americans doubles my numbers overnight. That was when Trump was telling us that 15 cases would soon be 0. The authors report that Trump tried to fire the official who approved the decision. The book also reveals a second episode, previously unreported, in which Trump repeatedly proposed that Americans who had been infected should be shipped to the U.S. military base at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Don't we have an island we own? Trump asked. What about Guantanamo? The word island was central to Trump's idea. According to the authors, he was eager to suppress the numbers on U.S. soil and figured if you keep people off the mainland, they don't count. In both cases, the infected citizens could have been quarantined at facilities in the continental U.S. That would have impeded the spread of the virus, but Trump, in his own words, viewed the presence of such people on the mainland as a threat to him statistically. None of this should surprise us. Trump's biggest concern was testing, the authors write. By producing test kits for the virus and administering them to more and more Americans, doctors and the government were gradually ascertaining the breadth of the crisis. Trump chafed at this progress. He said it made him look bad because he figured if people weren't tested, infections wouldn't be recorded and it wouldn't be counted against him. The authors report a phone call to Azar. Testing is killing me. I'm going to lose the election because of testing. What idiot had the federal government do testing? This is not new information in the sense that these things were previously reported, but the degree to which Trump's sole and primary focus was how he would look. And, you know, the unfortunate thing about all this is that Trump doesn't care about anybody. He really doesn't. Trump doesn't care about his own followers. Trump doesn't care about even people who support him. He cares about them as long as they're useful to him politically. And when they're not, he throws them in the trash like garbage. But the one aspect of this that could have gone better would have been if Trump had realized at the beginning, the way to win this politically is by doing what the doctors say and doing, you know, look at how New Zealand dealt with the virus. Look at how Taiwan dealt with the virus. There's other examples. It was really good for the leaders. And had Trump at the beginning thought, hey, forget about the fact that he doesn't care about people. He never cared about people. But if Trump had said at the beginning, the best thing politically for me is to manage this virus by doing a ton of testing, which helps people identify if they're sick and stay home and not spread the virus. If he had done that, it would have been good for him politically. And as I've said many, many times before, if Donald Trump had just done a passably okay job on the virus, he would be president right now instead of Joe Biden. There's no question about that whatsoever. But instead, Trump's concern was sabotaging the spread of the virus containment aspect in order to do what he believed, but wrongly so, that would look good. And in the end, it didn't help. It actually was a complete and total disaster. Just a couple of other things here. Trump and his aides belittled and resisted life-saving public health measures, obviously. The book reports that Mark Short, a veteran Trump aide serving as Pence's chief of staff, opposed a plan to send free masks to every household on the grounds that it would alarm the public. Senior Trump officials ridiculed masks, likening them to a training bra or underwear on your face. Short also opposed the economic shutdown that slowed the spread of the virus in March and April. And on the rare occasions when Trump pushed subordinates to move more quickly, he did so for personal advantage, not public health. In the fall, according to the book, he tried to oust FDA Commissioner Stephen Hahn for refusing to strong-arm FDA scientists into approving COVID vaccines before Election Day. One anecdote reported in the book is more significant than it might seem. In late March of 2020, Robert Kadlec, a senior HHS official, went to Trump's senior advisor and son-in-law, Jared Kushner, with a plan to mass distribute masks. When Kushner learned the masks wouldn't arrive until June, he exploded. "We'll all be dead by June," he told Kadlec. In the Post's retelling, this conversation comes across as a tale of delay and frustration, but it's worse than that. It shows how gravely Kushner and others in the White House privately viewed the crisis, which Trump was telling Americans publicly the virus would soon disappear. That is the epitome and a microcosm of the entire handling of the virus. We learned from the Bob Woodward interview that Trump did. Trump knew it was more serious than he was letting on. He said he didn't want to scare people. Jared Kushner, based on this anecdote, clearly knew privately how serious it was. Everything that they did was based on their worst instincts, their most self-centered instincts, and a complete and total lack of empathy and concern. I mean, just a disgusting expose. No individual incident is particularly shocking because what was going on publicly was bad enough. But I believe that we will continue to learn more about this. Just about every week, we're learning more about what was going on, and it's as disgusting as you can imagine. Roger Stone is the former Trump confidant, aide, who has also been a guest on this program. Roger Stone, of course, was convicted and then pardoned by Donald Trump. Roger Stone has a new hypothesis, which is that it is the Secret Service that was somehow involved in the Trump riots on January 6th. Now, I have to admit, we're going to look at a clip of this. And if I'm totally honest with you, I don't fully understand the conspiracy theory here. And I kind of love it in the sense that one of my favorite things is a conspiracy theory that doesn't even make any sense. Like, it's hard to even understand. There's lots of conspiracy theories where you hear it and you say, that just doesn't sound like it's really the way things are. But this is one where I'm left asking, what exactly is Roger Stone even arguing here? So let's start taking a listen. This is Roger Stone on Newsmax. I'm not even sure what he's claiming took place, but it involves the Secret Service. Let's take a listen.
I call it fake news.
Hey, Roger, did you, on January 6th, did you go in the building?
I would never even left the grounds of the Willard Hotel.
Yeah.
I came out in front of the hotel in the morning for a brief period to stretch my legs. You can watch the entire video. A number of patriots come up and ask for selfies or
Patriots. Yeah, Patriots really want. He's popular with the Patriot movement.
tell me that they're praying for me. But no, I was not even on the Capitol. I do find it odd that shortly after the president's speech, the Secret Service contacted someone who worked for me by phone and told me that they wanted to escort me to the Capitol. I declined. I was not.
What do you think that was about?
So I guess now what Stone is saying is an unprovoked call from the Secret Service saying we'd like to bring you to the Capitol would maybe be to implicate Stone. Maybe that's what they're saying, that they wanted to place Stone there to then implicate him in the riots, even though he didn't have anything to do with it. Tell me if that's how you're understanding this.
When you say that, was there something about that sounded fishy?
Well, I've worked for 3 American presidents. The Secret Service does not do political chores. The Secret Service does not perform logistical tasks. I find it rather suspicious, to be honest with you.
Suspicious in what way? Do you believe?
Yeah, it's like even the hosts are sort of unsure, like, what exactly are you alleging here?
That perhaps insiders, I'm trying to figure out how to word this, within the Secret Service or the CIA or other organizations were involved nefariously?
Look, I don't want to make that claim because I don't know it, but understanding how the Secret Service works, obviously the implication is that this is something the president wanted. I'm sorry, I declined. I was with Pastor Mark Burns and Reverend Randy Coggins in my suite watching the whole thing unfold on television.
Right. So
my other question.
Yeah, making the case. So I guess the conspiracy theory is the Secret Service. So Tucker Carlson and others have been saying it's the FBI that was involved in the Trump riots. Roger Stone is saying, I believe, we have to interpret it all because he's being kind of cagey and weird about it. But he's saying the Secret Service, which would not normally be involved in something like this, tried to put me at the scene of the crime in order for me to later be implicated or something like that. Now, of course, we don't actually have proof that this call even took place. If it did take place, we don't have proof that it was actually the Secret Service. There's no evidence for any of this, but it is another one of these conspiracy theories presented without any evidence. And we'll see if this one also becomes part of the referential record. Remember, with Tucker Carlson, Tucker floated this idea that the FBI organized the Trump riots. And then the next day, Congressman Louis Gohmert demanded we look into it, even though Tucker presented it without any evidence. That's how they do it. That's how they insert narratives as fact, which then become referential in their future claims. We'll see if it happens with this one, but that's the latest claim from Roger Stone. The Secret Service, it sounds like everybody other than actual Trumpists was involved. It was the Secret Service. It was the FBI. It was Antifa dressed as Trumpist, but definitely no Trumpist. But at the same time, it was totally peaceful. Figure that one out. Don't forget that the best way to support the David Pakman Show is by becoming a member, which gives you access to the daily bonus show, the regular show with no commercials. You also get access to our entire archive of every episode dating back a really long time and plenty of other awesome membership perks. Go to joinpakman.com and use the coupon code BETTER21 for a huge discount. Join Pakman.com. All right, let's talk a little bit about the Saturday Night Live situation, and then I have voicemail, and then we've got the bonus show and a lot of other things still to get to. This is, in a sense, it's not really a new story because it was sort of offhandedly reported in 2019, but now we're learning the full scope of this. Donald Trump actually did want the satirical television program Saturday Night Live investigated for making fun of him. And of course, there's a couple of stories here. One is the incredibly authoritarian perspective on what should be allowed in media in a country that supposedly has satirical media, a free press, etc., where making fun of politicians, including presidents, is something that you can do. That's one piece of it. The other part of it is just Trump is the endless victim with like the thinnest possible skin of anyone that we have ever heard of. So let's dig into this and look at it piece by piece. There's a great Vanity Fair article about this. And the article is by Bess Levin, and it actually quotes the Daily Beast, which reported, "It was the middle of Donald Trump's presidency, and he was yet again mad at Saturday Night Live, and he wanted the federal government to help him settle the score. In March of 2019, the then president of the United States had just watched an episode of the long-running liberal-leaning NBC sketch comedy series. Wasn't even a new episode, it was a rerun, and grew immediately incensed that the show was gently mocking him. It's truly incredible that shows like Saturday Night Live, not funny, no talent, can spend all of their time knocking the same person, me, over and over without so much of a mention of the other side," Trump tweeted, long before he was banned from Twitter for inspiring a violent mob. Like an advertisement without consequences, same with late night shows. Should Federal Election Commission and or FCC look into this? It was on its face a ridiculous question and threat, as SNL is obviously satire and therefore a form of protected speech in America that pissed off commanders-in-chief have no authority to directly subvert. However, then President Trump went farther than simply tweeting his displeasure with the late night comedians and SNL writers' room. The internal discussions that followed between the former leader of the free world and some of his political and legal advisors once again underscored just how much Trump wanted to use the full weight and power of the U.S. government to punish his personal enemies. Now, of course, the tweets we knew about from 2019 since they were public. What's new is this additional piece that we have now learned about. According to two people familiar with the matter who spoke to the Daily Beast, Trump repeatedly asked lawyers and advisors what the FCC, the courts systems, and the Department of Justice could do to probe or mitigate SNL, Jimmy Kimmel Live, and other late night shows. Quoting the Daily Beast, one source who has a law degree said that when they briefly discussed this with Trump more than 2 years ago, they made a point of saying that the Justice Department in particular doesn't handle these matters anyway. Trump seemed disappointed to hear that there was no actual legal recourse or anything that the FCC or DOJ could do to punish late night anti-Trump comedy. Can something else be done about it? Trump replied, according to the source, to which they responded with some version of "I'll look into it." The person says they never actually looked into it. This is horrifyingly authoritarian. Now, I know that there are many defenders of Trump who will hear this and they will simply say, oh, he was just mad and he was just musing. He wasn't really saying anyone should look into it. Yes, he was. He was, and he brought it up multiple times. He was saying someone should look into it. Fortunately, no one did, because it would go completely counter to everything that our country stands for when it comes to speech and free press and satire. But it's not news to us that Donald Trump had extraordinarily authoritarian leaning tendencies. We knew that. The part that to me continues to be stunning is that he was the most powerful person in the world, in the sense that President of the United States, colloquially considered the leader of the free world. There is no one more powerful than the American president. Trump himself, as a rich dude from New York, has had an entire life of privilege and power and went above and beyond what any president has ever done in terms of trying to limit the criticism of him, comedic criticism, serious criticism on news channels, any of it. and just so extraordinarily thin-skinned. Now, the one other thought, I don't really care too much about this whole like alpha male, beta male narrative that many conservatives like. But if you buy into that narrative, is this the behavior of an alpha male? I mean, by those who like Trump because they see him as an alpha and think about politicians in those terms, is this how a so-called alpha male behaves? I think the answer is obviously not. Saying, could we get the FCC to investigate the jokes being made about me? Absolutely laughable that anybody would see Donald Trump that way. And yes, even though the authoritarianism certainly shouldn't come as a surprise to us because it's been one of Trump's hallmarks for a long time, it's still horrifying that he was regularly trying to use the power of the federal government to do this stuff. Next, I want to talk a little bit about Donald Trump's reaction. So we already looked at the new reports about Donald Trump wanting Saturday Night Live investigated and looked into for satirical content that they did about Donald Trump, as they've been doing for on presidents, about presidents for decades. My guess is that in the past, when the president was someone other than Trump, Trump didn't find anything wrong with the satirical commentaries done by Saturday Night Live. Now, whether you find them funny or not, that's another question. I'm not a big SNL guy, but it is without question whatsoever that what they do is completely protected constitutionally, and that having the federal government look into it is absurd. Donald Trump yesterday put out another one of these statements where he denies the story, but sort of kind of like admits it in so doing. Let's take a look at this statement by Donald J. Trump. Trump says, the story that I asked the Department of Justice to go after ratings challenged without Trump Saturday Night Live and other late night losers is total fake news. It was fabricated. There were no sources, and yet the lamestream media goes with it. I did say, however, that Alec Baldwin has no talent, certainly when it comes to imitating me. The one who had what it took was Darrell Hammond. This is a former president, guys. With all of that being said, however, I do believe that the 100% one-sided shows should be considered an illegal campaign contribution from the Democrat Party. Hard to believe I got 75 million votes, the most of any sitting president, despite all of that together with a very fraudulent election, 2024 or before. So in it, Trump actually does say he thinks that SNL should be illegal. He is not saying it should be illegal in the sense that it's being reported that he wanted it investigated, but he believes that it counts as a Democratic campaign contribution, I guess, because the show's existence has monetary value to Democrats because they go after Republicans, but not Democrats. Now, the truth is SNL sort of goes after both. It is no doubt left-leaning. It's abundantly clear that it is a left-leaning show, but no president has been exempt from being targeted by SNL. But in denying that the story is a real story, even though he tweeted this stuff out in 2019, he tweeted this stuff out in the tweets that I read to you in the previous segment, he is saying actually there is criminality in Saturday Night Live, which is already completely off the wall, authoritarian and suppressive of what are constitutionally protected and not campaign contribution satirical segments on SNL. It's so funny how this guy, in trying to deny stuff, he often ends up confirming that at least the belief is true. And of course, when you publicly tweet it out, it all is perfectly believable. Now, Trump also put out one other statement yesterday. And these statements are so bizarre. Trump wrote, Georgia now plans to remove over 100,000 obsolete and outdated names off their voter rolls. Doing this, they say, will ensure voting files are up to date while at the same time ensuring voter integrity in future elections. But what about the last election? Why wasn't this done prior to the November 3rd presidential election, where they had us losing by a very small number of votes, many times less than the 101,789 figure? This means you won the presidential election in Georgia, but don't fret. Much other information will soon be revealed about Georgia and other states as well. It is coming out fast and furious. The 2020 presidential election was rigged. Just a word salad of further claims that he really won, and complaints that even though what George is doing now is good, they should have done it before, because in reality, he actually won Georgia. I mean, it is endless with this guy. And again, referencing, it's all going to come out very, very soon. Very unstable, and continuing to just put out what are the equivalent of tweets. And this guy is going to do everything he can to play a celebrity role in 2022. He wants to be revered. He wants 2022 candidates to come to him and pay a pilgrimage, whether it is a literal one or a digital one or a figurative one or whatever the case may be. He wants to be the decider for 2022, and he is so desperate to be that, and continuing to allude to soon we are going to learn the truth about 2020. Now, really funny, Mike Lindell of My Pillow, just as a quick update, who has been saying for a couple of weeks now, Trump will be reinstated in August. He has now shifted to saying, I might be off by a month. So now Mike Lindell's August is becoming September. Why? Well, August is only 5 weeks away. And obviously Trump is not going to be back in 5 weeks, nor in 9 weeks, which would be the end of August. So already Mike Lindell is starting to push back a little bit and point to September. They're going to do this all the way until they just say, hey, you know what? We've got to just vote in 2022. That's the way to do it, so that then we can impeach Biden. And so then Trump can come back in 2024. It was written on the wall all along, and it's becoming increasingly clear from these very strange statements from Donald Trump. We have a voicemail number. That number is 2192-DAVID-P. This is an example of a lot of what's wrong with this country. Now, I'm going to warn you guys, I'm going to play something that's pretty ugly. If there's kids in the room, you may want to get them out, or whatever the case may be based on your personal sensibilities on this stuff. I'm about to play a pretty ugly voicemail that tells us a lot of what is wrong with this country. Take a listen.
Hey, Dave, I'm just calling because I wanted to become a member. No, I'm just kidding you. I'm not a retard. Just wondering if you ever listen back to your shows and realize how much of a shield you are and a weak, pathetic man.
I assume by shield he means shill, right? I mean, I just am trying to figure that out.
Curious.
Okay, hold on. Let me go back. I missed just a few seconds of that.
How much of a shield you are and a weak, pathetic man. Just curious.
There it is. So, as you can see, not a particularly substantive critique. We get 3,000 messages like that every day. Now, not voicemails, right? So you've got to look at email, tweets, Facebook posts, Instagram comments, and of course, YouTube and Twitch comments. But 3,000 a day that are somewhere in the arena of stuff like that. These are not folks you can talk sense into. So we've got to figure out a way to win despite them. With them is just not realistic. We've got to win despite them. And there are a lot of them. Today on the bonus show, we will talk about West Nile positive mosquitoes found in Texas. What does it mean? We will also talk about Morgan Stanley, the company, will be banning unvaccinated workers at their offices starting soon. We'll talk about why and the legal infrastructure. And Russia wants to send cosmonauts to China. I'm sorry, to the Chinese space station. Not to China. I guess they could go to China. To the Chinese space station. We will talk about this possible new outer space alliance. And again, I mean, as if we needed more reasons to invest in space exploration. Maybe some of the right wingers will get behind it because Russia and China are getting together on the issue. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. Sign up at joinpakman.com and get instant access. I'll see you then. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. Blastlight is the world's smallest and most convenient UVC disinfection light to help keep you safe against COVID-19. I take mine everywhere I go. Go to davidpakman.com/blastlight to get it for 40% off. The link is down below. Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman.